All right, everyone, we've got to discuss Trump and the contraception mandate portion of the ACA. That is, of course, famously Obamacare. They've gone back to calling it the ACA, the Democrats have, which is funny because Obama wanted, when it first became a term, he's like, oh, I kind of like this Obamacare term because it's got my name on it. It's going to be so great. And, of course, it depends on who you ask. Some people got screwed over by it big time. Like their coverage, they get the same coverage and it costs more. Or they have to pay the same amount for less coverage and it's really, they're getting forced onto junk plans. And they used the mandate itself. They used the fee associated with it, which the Supreme Court called a tax. That's beyond argument. That's a decision that they made in allowing it at all. That's used to subsidize, to prop up people who are on sort of the junk plan and who have less money. And I guess they're like, well, at least I have some sort of insurance coverage. Yeah, for them it kind of works. But the problem is this with the contraception mandate, because I'm of two minds here on the situation. The first level is I wish that government weren't really involved at all in healthcare. Insofar as that's the case, I don't really care if employers are providing any sort of healthcare coverage for their employees. I don't think necessarily it's really necessary to mandate them to do so, and I'll tell you why. If we privatized healthcare entirely, if we underwent tort reform, if we encouraged as much in-state competition as possible and as much interstate competition as possible, then the cost of healthcare in this country would be so drastically lower, it's not clear we would still need employers to pull any dead weight for their employees. Might not be necessary because the cost would be so low. If that's the case, contraception and everything else, contraception's highly in demand. The cost of it would be significantly less. It would be affordable for even people in the lower middle class. If the government wanted to establish a direct subsidy for those that are below that are, you know, they're lower class, working class, so be it. It'd be so much cheaper than what we do now. We'd probably have a better healthcare system. But, and here's the big but, that's idealism. That's what we should do. It's probably not what we're going to do, unfortunately. As such, because the government does meddle in healthcare, which is shitty, it's insane, it makes things cost more, it makes them less efficient, it makes them bureaucratically strangulated, the ACA was a bad idea. But because government has become so interventionist towards our healthcare system, for no real reason, because there used to be a time when people in the lower classes could afford healthcare coverage in the United States. In fact, it was generally before about the 1970s or 1960s, thereabout, before it becomes really a major problem. Because that won't actually happen because Washington, D.C. is insane, the government should not be, I think, allowing businesses to cut out that part of coverage under the understanding that, oh, well, a corporation or a business entity can have moral virtues. No, the person running the business may, and I think there needs to be a differentiation here. Before people jump down my throat and say, well, you want to force employers to give out, tampons or whatever, or birth control pills. If the government's involved, and the business is dealing with the government insofar as that's happening, and getting any subsidization whatsoever, yeah, the government should not be making those moral decisions if it's going to be providing through employers a lattice work for coverage for employees, then yes, the employee's right to access that freely should not be abridged by the government. Absolutely. If you're going to have government shitty healthcare, then that government has to respect that fact, and so I would have to oppose it. But there is a caveat. The caveat would be small businesses. You got some mom and pop store with one employee. Mom and pop happen to be very religious. That's very different from a corporation. A corporation that has hundreds of shareholders and stockbrokers and lawyers and accountants and things under the sun, can you really make a legitimate argument that a substantial enough proportion of that actual power structure can have a certain moral view to the point at which the business itself must express a moral view and in that sense is applied to by the First Amendment in a more explicit sense? Now, I'm not saying, of course, businesses should be muzzled in like their community outreach, statements they make, ads and stuff. Of course not. But is that really an expression of one's First Amendment rights? The business isn't going to church. The business does not have a religion. The people in the business can. And if you have literally a one-horse sort of show. If you've got the mom and pop store and they happen to be religious, that's one thing. In my mind, that should be doctrinally separate for pure pragmatic purposes only, because in many cases there probably are religious individuals. They're like, well, yeah, we want a part-time employee to sweep the floors. That doesn't have anything to do with government moral virtue or anything, as opposed to a corporation where, you know, you get 10,000 employees, maybe you got 20,000 employees. I think there's a little bit of a difference there. It would be easier to argue, I would think, in my mind, that a business run by one person, as like an employee or two, should be able to express, because of the proportion, you know, in and of itself in many ways, religious views. Because sometimes, I mean, what if you have a business and it's like basically in someone's house? We're talking about somebody owns an orchard and they're like, well, yeah, we perform marriages here. We also happen to live here. This is technically our private property too. We're just making money off of it and filing taxes as a business entity. We're talking about them, they refuse like to do a gay wedding and they get sued for it or something along those lines, and I think that's a problem. But then we have corporations that are trying to say, oh, no, we're exempt from paying all this extra money because of my religion. Well, the business doesn't have religious views. This isn't some home business. This isn't some cottage industry we're talking about. These are mega corporations. They don't have morals. They never have had morals. Let's be honest here. Microsoft doesn't have morality. Chick-fil-A doesn't have morality. Hobby Lobby doesn't have morality. No, they're basically cutthroats. It's usually why they got where they are. It's totally different from some home business. I don't really care, morally speaking. If somebody's religious and they're making some money off their property, they have one little shop in their town, like an automotive shop or whatever, I'm not so compelled that it's a grave issue for the population if they're saying, I want to be religiously exempt. You know, I'm actually living here too, or I live right in this community and, you know, it's a religious community or something. It causes branding problems maybe with their business at all. What you may end up having is that if they can, they fire employees that are non-religious. They become insular within their communities. And that's the other big thing. When a contraception mandate or something like that goes against some people's religious beliefs, I don't believe in that. I don't care if people use contraception. When you do have something like that, would that not make them purge their employee roles, like in a roundabout way, of people that are likely to cause problems for them, and just say, well, yeah, we legally have to cover it, but we're not going to have to do that because none of our employees, they're all religious too, so they're not going to do the contraception thing. Wouldn't you think that this would cause people to like choose the most religiously pious members of their community to get around this and hire them instead if it is like the mom and pop store? Well, then you've just caused maybe a localized echo chamber to spring up. It's probably the opposite of what someone like Obama would like to happen, since he's a globalist. As far as mega corporations, though, no, they don't have any religious beliefs. Walmart doesn't have religious beliefs. None of these people do. Most of them, their religion is money. So it's very, very funny to hear them talk about, oh, Jesus won't let me provide the birth control pill. I'm not so sure of that. I think that that's a pile of bullcrap that you're using to exploit religiosity as a way to get around having to actually cover such things. So generally, I'm opposed to this. So what I would say is that I don't care if they increase the exemptions for family-run, sort of at-home style businesses. They want to be religiously exempt from providing the pill, condoms, whatever. Yeah, go ahead and do that. Like that is an honestly held religious belief, perhaps, that those people have. But when we're talking about a mega corporation with outlets across the U.S. pulling in billions of dollars, where's your religion? When is Hobby Lobby going to pull itself off of its foundation and trundle into a megachurch? It's not going to happen. I'm sorry, but I just don't see the point in that. I'm also not sure why we have to have a debate about such things as a nation. It's just not necessary. It's kind of like gay marriage. There were some people at the time that said, well, just get government out of marriage. Let people have, consider themselves married if they want to. They can go to any church they want, whether they do gay marriage or not, who cares? And say, well, we're married now. We're on the church's books. The state doesn't really need to be involved beyond, I guess, taxation or something. We don't even need to have that as a system. That was a decent point at the time. I just said, well, insofar as the state does issue marriages, it can't discriminate. Church, I don't really care. The church might not believe in such things. You can't force a church to issue a gay marriage. But there's a big difference between a Hobby Lobby or a Chick-fil-A or something like that and a mom and pop bookstore. A mom and pop, like a farm stand or something. The huge difference between the two. If they want an exemption, go ahead and grant it. If some corporation wants an exemption, you can be assured the real reason they don't want to provide that coverage is related to money. It's not related to religiosity. That's about all. Peace out.